This afternoon, we are going to have our continuation for debate. I think there were two students last time who were supposed to debate. I just saw the change in the expression of Al's face as Al and Shai are supposed to debate. Now, are you not? I mean, you are. However, instead of letting you debate, is it supposed to be Kent and Ken? However, instead of letting the both of you debate, we'll just have to proceed with the discussion with our discussion on the second lesson, which I'll present to you through a sharing of a screen. I'll share screen something to you for a while. Can you see this now? Please confirm if you can see this.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Wait. What about this? Can everybody see this?
Yes, sir.
I'm using the mobile data of my phone hotspot. See? Just imagine what the students are going to feel. No, sorry for that. So can everybody see this? The subject of argumentation, the proposition. Please confirm.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Every debate needs to have a topic that it's going to discuss. Without that topic, we can't have what we call as a debate. If not for debate, for argumentation. People argue because there is a topic that is being discussed. People argue on the topic. They want to see who is right and that the other can be proven wrong. That topic in debate is what we call as the proposition. Oh my God. What is a proposition? It is an expression in words. It is expressed in words, and it is an expression of an act of judgment. An act of judgment, on the other hand, is a mental assertion of something as true or untrue, or applicable or not applicable. It is expressed, this proposition is expressed in a complete statement, and that there is a subject and a predicate. For instance, you have a sample proposition, a dead proposition in debates. This house believes or resolved that death penalty should be implemented in the Philippines. The subject there is death penalty. The predicate or the simple verb by definition is should be implemented. So that's the structure of a proposition. At the same time, it allows an affirmance and a denial, meaning there needs to be a group that agrees with the proposition while a group tries to deny it or disagrees with that proposition. If your proposition is one that presents something that needs to be done or be observed, then the same concept follows. We either affirm or deny the need for such activity to be done. Sorry. Classes of propositions. There are two types of propositions. We begin with the proposition of fact, which is concerned with the truth or falsity of an act of judgment, and it aims at the formation of a belief to answer the question whether the assertion is true or not. The other class of proposition or type of proposition is a proposition of policy, which is concerned with the wisdom or unwisdom, the expediency or inexpediency of a course or action, meaning to have it efficiently, to have it accepted as it is efficient or not to be efficient, considered efficient. If a proposition of fact is geared at the formation of a belief, the proposition of policy aims at an action, and it answers the question, should it be done or should this course of action be followed? Once a proposition in a debate is given, we can actually divide it into several issues. The process of dividing an issue or dividing a proposition into several issues is partition. We divide a proposition into at least 3 partitions or 3 issues. The first issue, this is not, by the way, found in the notes, in the module that you received. The first issue is the issue on beneficiality. The beneficiality issue tells us of the groups or sectors who will benefit if the proposition is accepted, or if that proposition is accepted, who will not be benefited by it, or if we do not accept a proposition, who will also be benefited. There are several angles that you can look into. Again, if you accept a proposition, who are these groups or sectors who will be benefited? Also, if you accept that proposition, who will not also be benefited? And if you do not accept the proposition, who will also be benefited? And lastly, if still you do not accept the proposition, who will not be benefited from it? In the same way, we are talking about benefits. What the sectors or groups in the community can get by the time the proposition is implemented. The second issue, the issue on necessity. Simply put, it is a matter of discussing why that proposition is necessary to be accepted. Is it in the demand of time that that proposition be accepted as true? Or is it not in this circumstance that that should be accepted? Why should that be accepted? So this is a discussion beyond the sectors who will benefit from the proposition. It really revolves on the question why that proposition is necessary to begin with. Why it's necessary to accept or consider its implementation. The last issue for a proposition is the issue on practicability, which could come in 2 perspectives. The perspective on practicality and that of applicability. If we talk about practicality, this has something to do with the cost. If you implement that proposition, will it be costly? That's something. What costs are we talking about? Of course, we talk about financial costs, money, human resource, labor force. That's part of the human cost. Time itself is part of the cost. Will it expend so much cost? Because if it does, then it's costly, making it impractical. Applicability as an element to practicability has something to do with the legal connotation of a proposition. Meaning, if you accept that proposition, is there a particular legal basis that is being followed? Or if you accept it, does it rather go against any of the legal basis of the land? For instance, here in the Philippines, if you accept a particular proposition, does it violate the Constitution or any of the Republic Acts of the Philippines, any of the presidential decrees, executive orders? Is there a legal violation committed by the time that proposition is accepted? So that is in the context of applicability. Practicality and applicability are both aspects of the practicability issue. Practicality and applicability are not issues to a proposition. They are under practicability. Last year, at the time that we joined for CADBOL, one thing that we also learned is the issue on urgency. Why is it so necessary? Why is its urgency is like an extension of the necessity issue? Like, why is it so urgent to accept the implementation or acceptance of a particular proposition? So that's the issue on urgency, which again, you can see as an offshoot of necessity. So it all brings us back to these 3 main issues. beneficiality, necessity, and practicability. Practicability being divided into practicality and applicability. A proposition can be classified as a good proposition because it has particular characteristics. If it does not follow these characteristics, one might say the proposition is not really a good proposition. But mind you, there are debate formats that do not follow these characteristics because such formats give the debaters the opportunity to narrow down the scope of the proposition that's being provided. However, there are also some formats of debate out there that would require that the proposition be crafted following these characteristics. Generally, we have these characteristics of a good proposition. First, the proposition must be in the form of an assertion. It should be stated in a categorical, declarative, positive statement, not a question. And that there should be no word not or anything that denotes a negative interpretation of the proposition. We should not put that on the proposition. Therefore, we do not say resolved that women should not vote, because that is in violation to this characteristic. If the proposition is to be stated positively, that means that no negative expression should be found there. Another thing, if you have this, should we accept divorce in the Philippines? That is not a good proposition because a proposition should be stated in declarative form, not in the form of a question. Next characteristic, the proposition must express only one act of judgment. I tell you this, an act of judgment is equivalent to one verb or one predicate. Therefore, if you find two predicates or two acts of judgment in that proposition is not a good one because that places two things to be proven in one argumentation or debate round, which is not actually a good thing. When you debate, when you argue, or when you formally argue, do debate, you should defend or speak of one matter at a time. There's no need to focus on so many acts of judgments when you only have to think of one that needs to be proven or disproven at that point in time. Two assertions or two courses of action or problems expressed in one proposition will create confusion. This is really true. It might bring about a lot of problems where you as the speaker happen to be defending or proving one act of judgment while your opposing debaters might try to defend the other act of judgment. At any rate, you have not arrived at a common understanding of what you should be fighting for in that debate round. For example, let's have an example for this. This house resolved that homeworks should be removed from the school curriculum, but will be given as a special requirement. So that doesn't make sense anymore. Which between the two are you really trying to prove? The removal of it from the curriculum or the making of it as a special requirement? To avoid such confusion, you only think of one act of judgment to talk about. If you want to talk about it being removed from the curriculum, then go. That will be the topic for the day. If you want to talk about it being a part of a special requirement, then go. That will also be the topic for that round, for as long as only one act of judgment is being discussed. Another one, another characteristic, you have the proposition must be susceptible of only one interpretations. General terms susceptible of more than one interpretation should be avoided. Like for instance, this house believes that women should have a position. The word position there can be interpreted in so many ways. There are so many angles that you can look into by the time you interpret this proposition. I'll try to call one of you, like, how could you possibly interpret this, Kim? This house believes that women should have a position. Try to think of a wholesome answer, huh?
It's like they have like they are respected as like they have ano ba sir, like a rank or a place in the society, like somewhat like that.
Hey, that interpretation of Kim also makes sense, and that's correct. However, another interpretation can be provided here. Al, what interpretation can you also provide to this proposition? Kim's interpretation is that women be given a place or rank in the society. What about you, Al? How else can you interpret this?
The literal, sir. They will have a
Like what position?
like sitting position or like that.
Oh, see, that's also available. That's an available interpretation, that women be given a sitting, be granted the chance to have a sitting position. What about you, Vem? What do you have another interpretation for this?
Like before, sir, before when women were
Vem, sorry, Vem.
not allowed to have a position.
Again,
I
Vem,
guess,
sorry,
sir,
Vem,
like
sorry,
before
Vem.
when women were still not allowed. Before, sir, when women were still not allowed to have a position in the government.
Ah, okay, a position in government office. I think that's what you're referring to. Oh, see, we have a third interpretation now for just for the word position. And that makes this proposition a faulty one. We do not want a proposition to be structured in such manners. Next, the proposition must be unprejudiced. Words of praise or of blame should not be used. For instance, resolved that dishonest officials should be weeded from service. What word here places prejudice? I'll call Harl. In this sample, Harl, what word places prejudice in this proposition?
Dishonest.
Correct. You have the word dishonest. Even before the debate round has started, the proposition has already created a bias towards the people that are part of the discussion in the debate round. This debate round is to talk about officials. But before they've been defended, they've already been labeled as dishonest. And that's being biased and prejudiced. That has nothing to do with the debate round. If they are dishonest, if you manage to prove that the officials are really dishonest, then of course, that's a conclusion coming from the exchange of arguments. But that has nothing to do with the proposed statement that is going to be talked about in the debate round. The word dishonesty there is something that is still to be proven. And it's unfair that in the proposition, it already came out. So we do not want prejudices in a proposition. The next one. It should avoid abstractions and generalizations. Propositions should be as free as possible from vague and sweeping generalizations. For instance, resolved that women should organize a civic club. This is too sweeping to include all women, as there's no particular target on who these women are that should form a civic club. The word women here is not yet that specific, because for sure, this does not concern all of the women in the community. There might be a particular case where an instance provided for a certain group of women to need that, for that certain group of women to have the need to form a civic club. Next, The proposition must be concise and simple. All unnecessary words should be omitted, and the words used should be easy to comprehend. We do not want that it come out like this. Resolved that in order to serve the end of justice and meet public demand, retail trade be nationalized. In I'd like to call one of you. Wait. Sorry. How can you simplify this proposition? King.
Yes, sir.
King, the word. Here's our proposition, King. It's a long one, and it's a wordy proposition. Resolved that in order to serve the end of justice and meet public demand, retail trade be nationalized. How can you simplify this? It is said that there are unnecessary words in that proposition. So what should be our simpler proposition?
Resolved that in order to serve the end of justice, retail trade be national.
Yes, King. So that's the original proposition, King. So what should be a shorter way of stating it, or a simpler way to state the proposition? I'd like to try calling, so I'll call someone else as well. What about Harvey? How can you simplify this proposition, Harvey? What about Corinne? Corinne? Corinne has not been available since this morning. Again, this proposition is wordy. There are just so many words in it, which means that you should eliminate some words to arrive at the topic that you should just discuss. Ken, how would you simplify this?
I'll just. Hello.
Yes, Ken?
I'll just try, sir. I'm not sure.
Go.
Resolved that retail trade be nationalized to serve the end of justice and meet public demand.
Oh, you added some words there.
Where, sir?
What should we try to prove here? What are we actually, in this proper proposition, assuming that we are in the government or in the side that affirms with this proposition, what are we trying to prove? That retail trade should be nationalized, period. Therefore, that stands as our proposition. Resolved that retail trade be nationalized. The other words, in order to serve the end of justice and meet public demand, actually should not be placed in the proposition. Rather, we can use them as arguments. We can use them as reasons to support our stand on nationalizing retail trade. Try to look at it. Why do we want to nationalize retail trade? In order to serve the end of justice and to meet public demand. See? And there we can present further elaborations to, and examples to the two reasons that we have already stated. So that's it. We don't need so many words in a proposition. We just want to say what we want to say to know what just needs to be defended. Making the proposition concise and simple. Next, a proposition must be debatable, of course. That act of judgment should not be obviously true or false, and should allow sufficient room for an intelligent difference of opinion. We do not debate on facts. we do not debate on statements that have already been verified because that's pointless. No one has to debate on this house is solved that the sun is a star. You don't need to debate on that. I had a student. This always reminds me of a previous student here in IA. In an exam, I wrote, this house believes that Bohol is in region 7. I intentionally placed there wrong or faulty propositions. It was in that part of the exam, I intentionally placed faulty propositions. And the goal is to determine the characteristics violated by these faulty propositions. So when it came to that number, which stated, this house believes that Bohol is part of region 7, of course, what I was expecting is that it violated the characteristic stating that propositions must be debatable. Because it's a fact, Bohol is in region 7. We don't debate on that one anymore. Surprisingly, what the student wrote is, I don't know if he sees this, if he watches the video, that student wrote on his paper, the proposition is faulty because Bohol is not in region 7. So I was surprised. If Bohol is not in region 7, then where is it? The student has lost track of his list of facts. And not to mention, he went outside of the supposed requirement for that part of the test to simply tell us of characteristics violated by those faulty propositions. Again, we do not debate on something that is obviously true or obviously false. The proposition, another characteristic, must be so worded that the burden of proof shall fall on the affirmative side. Whoever will take up the affirmative side of the question must be the party who is dissatisfied with the present order of things and therefore demands a change in the existing situation. This is where the status quo becomes a part of a debate round. And that status quo does not satisfy the ones on the affirmative side. Because they're dissatisfied of the status quo, they're asking for a change of things. For instance, this house believes that this house believes that priests should have more strict requirements before getting ordained. Assuming that that's our proposition, then the status quo would include, for one to be ordained, he just needs to finish several years of philosophy and theology, 1 year or 2 years of being immersed in the community, and after that comes the ordination. I'm not really sure what the exact requirements are. This is just for discussion purposes. And then only to find, as I go on, only to find out that there are really priests who can't really perform what is expected of them. Some of them, at worst, have engaged themselves in illicit relationships. And that does not make a good model of a religious community. And it is for this reason that we are proposing for a change of requirements for priesthood or priest ordinations. So see, what I did there first was to talk of the status quo. What are the current things? What are the current considerations of things? What is the current status of things? And I'm not satisfied with it. Therefore, I'm presenting a new set. And that is where the burden of proof will come in. The burden of proof lies on the affirmative side at the start of a debate round. Next characteristic. I think there's one more. Yeah. The proposition must be interesting. And this is very important. However, a certain proposition may be most interesting to one audience, but most uninteresting to another audience. For it to be interesting, the proposition must be within the comprehension of both the audience and the speaker. To know whether a proposition is interesting or not is not at the full disposal of a debater. Take note, there may be a portion of your audience who will find your discussion interesting and entertaining, while some might find themselves not relating their mindset to the debate round or argumentation that you're actually doing. It might be too difficult for them. It might sound too intellectual for them. At any rate, they could not find themselves, they could not get themselves relatable to the argumentation that's going on. And that defeats the interest that you want them to develop towards your proposition. This is on a case-to-case basis. If the proposition talks about trade and commerce, of course, you should expect that people in the field of trade and commerce, in the field of business, are interested to know how it goes. While those in the field of medicine might not be as highly interested as those in the field of trade and commerce. If it's a debate round going to talk about grades, homeworks, assignments, school obligations, those in the field of social education and social psychology might find the topic interesting, while those in the field of trade and commerce might find it not as interesting as they hope the debate round to be. So that's on a case-to-case basis. So as said, as requested, for a proposition to be interesting, it must be within the comprehension of both the audience and the speaker. I will now stop the sharing of the screen so that I can get back to the grid with all of your faces. So how was it? How are the characteristics of a good proposition? Was I clear to everybody? I mean, was my voice clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Chixley, someone's trying to appear in your camera. Any question regarding the characteristics of a good proposition? And again, take note of those issues in a proposition. Like for instance, when you do the Oregon-Oxford format or the Oregon format, the debaters there are based on these issues. Meaning, you really have a necessity speaker, you also have a beneficiality speaker, and you have a practicability speaker. Your speeches are really narrowed in terms of content to what your issues are. Back in college, I was assigned as a practicability speaker. That has always been my orientation, as a practicability speaker. Therefore, my speech did not talk of sectors who will be affected by the time the proposition is implemented. I talked about the legality of accepting the proposition. I talked about whether the proposition is costly or not, because the costliness and legality of a proposition are under practicability. In the British parliamentary format or in the Asian parliamentary format, these issues are not necessarily labeled as ascribed to a particular speaker. However, it helps if you speak and your speech is grounded to an issue. In Britparl and in Asian Parl, speakers are not labeled as issue speakers, not like in the Oregon-Oxford format. We do not say, we welcome now the beneficiality speaker. No, there is a different name for the speaker in the British and Asian parliamentary formats. But your speeches may cover these issues. That is why last year in Kadbol, the adjudicators tend to adjudicate this way. The proposition this afternoon has been talked about in terms of, we have timeliness, that's urgency. In terms of the benefits, beneficiality. In terms of practicality, that's practicability. So see, the issues still come out. But in Asian again, or in Britpal, you don't need to be ascribed as that kind of a speaker. But your speech may focus on these issues. Questions? Do we have questions? Is there a question? If there's none, I'll now end the discussion for debate so that we can proceed with a continuation for poetry reading. So I will now cut the recording. Thank you so much for listening to the discussion on debate.